I believe that many of you have people or places or things or pets that brought things to your life throughout your life, and I would like to invite you to think about somebody today. Let's give a great Creative Mornings welcome to Ashley Hawkins.
Welcome to Studio 23. I'm Ashley, as you all have figured out by now. I'm so glad you all are here. This is actually the first event like this in our expanded space, which we are calling The Other Side. So thank you for being here for that today. I am truly honored to be a speaker with Creative Mornings. So thank you all to the team for inviting me and letting me spend some time with you guys here this morning. I'm going to do a couple of plugs for Studio 23 because then I'll get into the presentation and I'll forget. Hillary is our assistant director in the Studio 23 apron. She's wonderful. Elizabeth is our education and communications coordinator. They're wonderful. So Hillary's going to be doing some prints next door with a skull and crossbones for a takeaway. So after I finish blathering on, you can go over there and take a print or make one yourself. And our winter print fair is our next big event here. So December 9th and 10th, 11 to 4, us and 35 artists selling wonderful handmade goods. So come back for that. And now I'm going to talk about what I'm going to talk about. So death and loss and reproduction and living a creative life. So I have always been a bit macabre, I think. So my parents had me at 17, and that's them. I think my mom was pregnant with me in this picture. This was their senior homecoming. That may or may not be the car that I was conceived in. I've never asked, and I'm not going to. And hopefully they won't watch this video because I don't want them to tell me. But they had me very young. So I spent a lot of time with family members. And as I mentioned, always a little macabre. So there's Zombie Me in 92 and then Zombie Me in 2009. And I grew up in the care of my Aunt Danielle quite a bit, who was just 11 years older than me and tasked with dragging me around wherever she went and letting me watch whatever it was that she was watching. So at, 9 years old, I began reading Dean Koontz's entire collected works. And if you're not familiar with Dean Koontz, he's like Stephen King's less talented younger brother. So my parents were just very happy I was reading thick books, and it didn't matter that they were about like murder and rape and horrible things. At 10, I penned a short story. The first line was, "The sky was the color of blood." Which I think I ripped off from Dean Koontz, actually, pretty much directly. My favorite movie growing up was The Lost Boys. Yes. The best movie of all time, possibly. Which I think I watched first at the ripe old age of 3. And so the reason for most of my tendency toward the dark side was my Aunt Danielle. Here she is in the middle in a pink shirt that somebody probably made her wear, and on the right, a little bit older, and I'm that vision in pink on the left-hand side in the picture. She was cool. I'm pretty sure, as I recall now, styled herself directly after the Lost Boys, with Aquanet sprayed hair and leather jackets and motorcycle boots, and she liked having me around because I thought she was cool, I think. I'm pretty sure. I spent so much of my growing up years with Danielle and just really taking it in and being with my cool pseudo sister. And I kept in touch through high school and college, and we moved away from Ohio, but she stayed there, and she was just always there for me. She was always this cool person that I could turn to and talk to. And I visited a few times after we moved. I spent the summer when I was 12 with my aunt and my grandparents, basically helping my grandfather die and being there for him. And then, life came in and I started college and got busy, and she had 2 small kids and she was busy, so we didn't talk as much, but we still stayed in touch, and she was just this wonderful influence in my life. And then she was cool to me, but I think in real life she was probably kind of the nerd in high school, so she was had Marfan syndrome, which made her tall and lanky and with a weak heart. And so I think her motorcycle jacket and her cool big hair and her posturing were kind of armor against this condition that she was living with and a way to look cool. And so at 32, Danielle's heart gave out and she died. And she left her little boys, just 4 and 7, and me, a 20-year-old college student who just bereft and terribly sad. And Danielle's death is what made me an artist. So this is kind of my thesis here for this presentation, is that every act of creation is in some way fighting against the inevitability of death and loss. It's a refusal to be forgotten. It's about building something more than you and leaving something of yourself for the future. So up to this point in art college, as I like to call it, I was making navel-gazing work about my waist circumference. And if my original high school boyfriend and I were going to break up, spoiler alert, we did. But at this time, in my grief, I found printmaking. And I fell in love with printmaking. And I, at VCU Arts, up to this point, was making horrible oil paintings. I was a terrible painter, and terrified of them. And my colleagues and my professors were all pretty convinced that the only real art was a big-ass oil painting, right? So if it wasn't 8 feet square and wet for 25 years, it wasn't real art. So at that point, I said, F it. I really leaned into printmaking, and it's where I found myself as an artist. This print, I still, to this day, think is successful, which is pretty cool, because I think most of you who make things and you look back at them a few years later, you're like, ugh, I'm sick of looking at that. I still like looking at this. So this, using the tagline of The Lost Boys, the best movie of all time. Sleep all day, party all night, never grow old and never die. And this was a part of grieving, but it was also got to the conceptual level where I wanted to be with my work. So you could accomplish most of the things, and Danielle accomplished most of those things, but you can't cross the last one off the list. So these are some works from that time. The one on the left, I made a kind of a reliquary series of mementos that I wish Danielle had left me in her will. This was a Def Leppard t-shirt. We shared a love of Def Leppard. I saw them at the state fair. It's cool. So I didn't get a Def Leppard t-shirt from Danielle, so I made my own. The one on the right is actually a full-scale fringed leather jacket that I made as a collage plate and printed so that I had a fringed leather jacket. This is a print called Can I Have Your Fringed Leather Jacket When You Die? Which is, and featuring one of my cousins sort of as a surrogate for myself, and playing with etching and angel wings and fringe and this, silhouette specter of death. So it's all, literal and college-y art, but I'm still proud of these works. So in falling in love with printmaking, I decided to start a community print shop with 4 other ladies, or 3, there were 4 of us, that's math, in 600 square feet. So like we said, Studio 23 now is 13,000 square feet, so it was a little bit smaller. And we borrowed a printing press. We bartended to pay the bills. Every spare dime and thought and moment went into creating this little shop. And ostensibly it was to keep making our own work. And that was true, but I think really it was about building something bigger than ourselves and building something for the community. So we were successful in that, and in just under a year ended up moving to a studio on West Main Street, right by Trimey Gallery and a block east of the Visual Arts Center. And it was walkable and more centrally located, so our programs grew. And we also had 3,000 square feet from 600 square feet, so we kind of just made up stuff to do because we had large rooms to do it in. So we had a gallery for a time called Gallery 23, obviously, until we figured out that we weren't gallerists, and so we stopped doing that. But this is an exhibition in the gallery there. Our community grew. We were all volunteer at the time, so we just did everything, said yes to all things, let people in the door, went to other people's, places, and tried to spread the word of art making and printmaking and building the creative community in Richmond. And At this time, I returned and got my master's in public administration, basically so that I could run the studio and not anger the IRS as we became a nonprofit. And we got nonprofit status in 2011, which has been transformative. Pro tip, don't do the paperwork yourself if you're becoming a nonprofit organization. Hire a lawyer to do it, it's worth it. I did it, it took a year, I did it wrong, and then we had to hire a lawyer anyway. So within 4 years, we had pretty much outgrown that space. We didn't have a lot of capital. I was being paid as a staff person. I think my first year salary was 12,000 buckaroonies, which was more than zero, so I was thrilled. And at this time, I also got knocked up with my first baby, intentionally, and with recklessly, probably. We'd only been together about 6 months when we decided we were going to have babies and spend the rest of our lives together. And so far, it's working out. So this is me, very pregnant, in a toga at a burlesque fundraiser called Empire of Pleasures, a Night of Colossal Indulgence. Which I still really like. And this is Deepa du jour on the right, Richmond burlesque dancer extraordinaire and now mom. And I'm a little bit sad that I put both of these pictures on the same slide because she's looking a little better than me there, but that's okay. So we had this wonderful event. We raised about $7,500, and at the end, the fire marshal came in and said, "You don't have a certificate of occupancy on this building. We'll let these people finish their beers and then they have to go." And I was like, what? And waddled around in a toga and asked lots of questions so people could, didn't have to chug their beers. And come to find out, this building that we'd been in for 4.5 years, we weren't technically allowed to occupy because we weren't using it for the purpose that the city intended us to use it for, or wanted it to be used for, which was manufacturing when it was once a Coca-Cola bottling factory in the 50s, which is the last time the building had a CO. So I spent my maternity leave and the first few months of this guy's life, this is Max outside of the Main Street studio, struggling and fighting with the city and trying to figure out, like, how do we stay in this building? Like, we absolutely need to stay in this building. Like, we've worked so hard. The specter of the death of Studio 2-3 seemed very real there. And then one day I had a board member say, "You know what, why don't we just move?" And I was like, oh, cool, we could just move. So we started looking around, and I snuck into this place 3 years ago around Thanksgiving. They had begun demo on the original studio side, and they left the back door open, so I clambered over some drywall debris and just saw the light. And saw the windows, and saw the mezzanine, and thought, okay, this is it. So it didn't happen overnight, but it did happen in about 6 months. We had builders and building owners who were willing to do the warm vanilla shell, and for those of you who haven't clamored with builders, that means they do the basic stuff and you pay for anything above that, which to us was like really wonderful. We were like, oh, we'll have drywall and lights that work and central heat and air? Wow, cool. So we had to raise about $80,000 to get in here. We did it through grants, through Mary Morton Parsons Foundation, CultureWorks, individual contributions of about $30,000, and most of those were $250 and less, and an Indiegogo campaign, which raised about $15,000 and was, I think, just a really good tool to let people know what Studio 2-3 was, what we were doing, and that we needed them to give us $10 so that we could pay for drywall. And so this is Studio 2-3 today, with light and people and an amazing growing community. So nonprofit mission statement here. I think as Jolinda said, there's hundreds of artists that use this space every month, thousands of people that come through for classes, and it's just been such a reward for me to be in charge of running and maintaining a space that makes people's creative aspirations a reality. We've grown dramatically just this year. We launched S23 to go, styled after an ice cream truck to delight your spirits, and to make one guy really mad on the first day that we did it at Earth Day. He literally said, "Where's ice cream?" And we were like, whoa, dude. That's only happened once. So, and now we have Prince of ice cream on the truck, which we haven't given to anybody yet, but we're going to try and see if it makes it better or worse. So keep you posted. And then where you're sitting today, which we are calling the other side, a dramatic capital expansion. So this one costs about 150 grand, which we're still working on. But we just ran out of space over there. We had demand for field trips for 50 and 60 kids, team building groups of 50 or more, our winter print fair, our auction, all of our classes. So the solution kind of presented itself just, I don't know, what was it, February, March, April, not too long ago, when the builders offered us this space at a rate that we could actually afford, which was really cool. So we've added 10 new studios, and we have a couple of our new studio members here. I see Sarah in the back too, and Zach and other Sarah. I won't call you other Sarah ever again, I'm sorry. So going back to this thesis of mine, in 2014 and again in 2016, I became a mom. So that's Max on the left and Zoe on the right. You can tell that Zoe's a girl baby because her pink hat has a bow, apparently, I learned when you are at the hospital. Interesting. And for those of you who are parents, the specter of death is never more terrifying than when you have children. Now, not only do I need to keep myself alive, but I have two tiny, wonderful, amazing people to be alive for, to model life and to keep alive, which is, sometimes challenging when your son's leaping from high objects. This picture on the right, I think, is the best moment of my life. When my son met his sister for the first time. And he was 2.5, and he looked up at me and he said, "That's my baby. That's my Zoe." And I said, "Oh, God." These are just gratuitous baby pictures. Look how small she is. She's so tiny. And that's Max in what I thought was a bear suit for 3.5 years and figured out last weekend is a freaking monkey suit. It rocked my world. I was at Lamplighter, and the cashier was like, "Oh, is that a bear?" "No, it's a monkey. Look at the tag. There's a monkey on it." And I was like, "Oh." In parenting and living and working and being a mom and a business owner and an artist, can we have it all? No. We have to make choices to live a creative life. And so every decision, I'm filtering through this question of how can I be the nonprofit businesswoman, the artist, the mother, that I want to be all at the same time. And we're always making choices and sacrifices to live the lives we want. So I made a list of my choices here, which is sobering. I drive a 2004 Ford Escape. It's paid off. I have no car payment. We live in a 900 square foot home. I shop at Aldi, and I have an entire additional 30-minute presentation about how awesome Aldi is, if anybody wants to listen. I keep calling Jay my husband. He's not my husband, kind of my fiancé. I mean, we're eventually going to get married, but he's not giving me a ring or anything. He's my baby daddy, I think is accurate. But he gives me hell every time I bring up Aldi. He's like, "Oh God, here she goes again." If anybody says Aldi, he's just like, "Oh, okay." Retirement, we're not sure. Future us will figure this out. But Jay builds houses, so I'm just telling him to build more houses because I work for a nonprofit salary and I'm thrilled to do it. And vacations, if anyone wants to keep our kids for a week, I'll take any takers later. And every event at late night at work is time I'm missing with my children. Every piece of artwork I make for myself is work that I'm not doing for the studio and time that I'm not spending with my family. And so finding that balance it's a perpetual battle. This is a picture of us made by tintype photographer Giles Clement, who comes through town occasionally. We sent it out as our Christmas card. Last year, it felt fitting given the tenor of the world, and on the back it said "Merry effing Christmas." Jay's family was not pleased. It was actually kind of a scandal. There was an aunt who just thought somebody was pranking her. It was odd. So the way that we've chosen to live creative lives is to make our children directly a part of them. Max and I now make prints together. This is Max working on some birds. And that print is evidence that Max and Mommy were here and that Max and Mommy worked together, and that we loved each other. And this is a print that I made called I Love You More for Max. When my 2.5-year-old came home from school and I said, I love you, Max. And he said, I love you more. And I was like, oh God. But somewhere in having children, the old you dies. You lose who you once were. I lost the word lose, or most of it at least. And there's this part in a story that I keep reading, and I encourage you all to read it. And this is where I needed notes because I was going to read it verbatim. Yeah, will you get them? They're in my purse in the office. It's called A Love Story by Samantha Hunt, and it's published in the New Yorker. It's a fictional piece, but it's about becoming a mother and hormones and postpartum time. And she decides to write a pamphlet about motherhood and being a woman. Oh, that was efficient. Thanks, Hillary. I am going to read part of it to you. There's no self left. Why would there be? From one small body, I made 3 new humans. I grew these complex beauties. I made their lungs and noses. It took everything I had to make them. Liver, take it. Self-worth, it's all yours. New people require natural resources, and everyone knows you don't get something for nothing. Why wouldn't I be hollowed out? Who can't understand this math? The strangest part of these calculations is that I don't even mind. Being hollow is the best way to be. Being hollow means I can fill myself with stars or light or rose petals if I want. I'm glad everything I once was is gone and my children are here instead. They've erased the individual and I'm grateful. The individual was not special in the first place. And really, these new humans I made are 1,000,000 times better than I ever was. This is my latest piece of artwork called I Grew These Complex Beauties. More evidence of our children being creative, living creative lives with us, because that's the choice that we've made, and that's also pretty efficient, just bring them with you. So Max in a hard hat during the expansion here, Max on a steamroller printing a giant Richmond map. Zoe with me when I woke up early last November on a day where the world seemed so much darker and more terrible, and I was bringing a little girl into it who was just a month old. So Elizabeth sewed her a little pink hat, and she came to work with Mommy, and we printed posters and ephemera with 200 community members for the Women's March in DC. That will always be Zoe's memory. That will always be my memory, that my daughter was here making these choices and fighting with me. So, in summation, now that I'm crying like a baby, creation is fighting against death and loss. I think the bravest choice we can make is to live a creative life and make the sacrifices that entails. So, I'm pretty sure that's the end of my presentation. Thank you all very much.